Over the last several years, I don't do a lot of stuff talking about newer books and things coming out because, well, to say they're different would be an understatement. But at the core of everything, comics can be a variety of things, right? And we really seem to focus on superheroes, right? Which is nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. And that's what I'll be focusing on today because I think a lot of things that may be missing from the core of a lot of modern comics is forgetting that we are talking about heroes, the popular stuff, right? Um, and sometimes you just need to go back and realize that when you started reading these comics, what was it that brought you there? What was it about these characters that you connected with? What was about these characters that really grabbed you? Was it the drama? Was it the tension between holding a secret identity from them being caught by all their supporting cast, the love of their life? Will they be caught? And for me, what when it started out was some of the things that first grabbed me were real life things as a little 4 and 5 year old kid that I could kind of understand seeing in these comics. And this is all through hindsight of 2020 vision, you know. And I remember the two things I remember is I had this little pocket book. A little pocket book is what they were called. It's just a little book where they collected some Steve Ditko, Stan Lee, Spider-Man stories, just Spider-Man stories. And the Hulk was walking through a cave. Spider-Man had to hide from him, and he jumped into a pool of water in a cave. And I knew that was stagnant. As a little kid playing in the woods over here in the mountains and things like that, I was like, oh no, he's going to get sick. The other thing that grabbed me was when I mentioned secret identities, was when Darkoth. I had this one is my stepdad's collection actually read, one is an upgrade. And this really tore me up because Darkoth was created by Doctor Doom. All right. This was Ben Grimm's best friend. But he didn't recognize him, and Darkoth never told him. And the thing in Darkoth would fight. Meanwhile, you would follow the thought bubbles up to the thought balloon, and Darkoth would be thinking to himself, he doesn't know him as his best friend. 5 years old, that's serious stuff. So along those lines, I ended up reading more stories from the uncle and things like that. Then I ended up reading this book, Justice League 111, with a whole bunch of reprints in it as well. And in the back of the book, it introduced something that really stuck with me. It actually sort of made me kind of cheer for the villains. We ended up getting the Earth 3 villains. It was a reprint of Justice League, what was it, 29 and 30? I have number 29 here, which is their first appearance here, but this was the multiverse, the real multiverse, the first one, in my opinion, that Gardner Fox had introduced in Flash 123 back in the 60s. But anyway, we were seeing Earth 3, where in Earth 3, the heroes were villains. The villains won on their planet, and they would come over. And now we have these heroes fighting their true opposites, okay? And this always stuck with me, and I always felt there was something more to it that I didn't have words. It was a feeling as a kid, okay? Then when I was about 11, between 5 and 11, if you will, our library actually had books in it where they reprinted a Fantastic Four story where they faced evil villains of evil versions of their self that I believe Franklin Richards, their son, had created. And the Fantastic Four fought their exact opposites, monster versions of them. And then at 11, this is the original book. I've upgraded. It has been signed by Mike Golden, but this book came out at Batman Special number 1 in 1984, and I was fascinated with this story because it introduced the Wraith. I know Mike Barr and Mike Golden did this, right? But this was on the night that Bruce Wayne's parents were killed. Across town, a little kid was with his parents who were breaking into a building, and Officer Jim Gordon had to shoot his parents in front of them for committing the crime. Both grew up training themselves, and the Wraith became an evil mirror version of Batman. Now, as you can see, I've held on to this. It is beat up because I read and reread this. It's fantastic. But now, if we get into what makes the hero, and this is a little bit DC centric, I'm going to admit. And before, why I think this kind of makes the difference between a DC hero and a Marvel hero, with exceptions, of course, is the fact that DC heroes really seem to have to face themselves. And I think that's what makes them better heroes. And I'll get on to that. So, one of the things I'm going to show you is what I consider not to be a hero and why. And some of these choices are going to rile some people up. By no means do I mean to offend. Okay. But we're having a grown up conversation. This is objective. All right. My problem with Booster Gold being a hero is considered a hero is first, let's go with his character. He's a loser who takes shortcuts. Um, by no means would that disqualify him from being a hero, but his origin story is that of a villain. You know what I mean? Gambling scandals, steals things from the museum he's working on with the Justice League and things like that. Steals everything that he has, goes back in time and tries to make bank, become rich and famous. He's all about ego. And whenever they've had these stories where Booster Gold could have bettered himself, become a real hero and things, that loses his gimmick, his what makes him him. What people are, it's comedy. He's supposed to be comedy relief with that. But in terms of being a hero, he's not one, and I can't stand it because they keep injecting him. The other one that I can't stand, that I don't consider a hero, even though she is Winged Victory from Astro City. Winged Victory from Astro City. Kurt Busiek really examined the dynamics of heroes and gave them really cool spins. You had the Sentry. Oh, not the Sentry. Oh my gosh. Now I'm one blank. But anyway, you have a Superman archetype. Or maybe he is the Sentry. Anyway, but he's a Superman archetype. Blue hair and everything, calling back to the 4-colored days of comics where black was substituted with blue hair for shading and things like that. And he's so powerful, being from the future and having sort of a biochemical computer help him know when and where disasters are happening. He determines who and how many people he's going to save with how much time he has. Winged Victory determines who she's going to save by their gender. She will let a busload of kids, if they're mostly boys, fall off her bridge if she can save one girl. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but this is her catch and her hook. I consider her to be more a step away from being a villain, because Booster Gold is all about ego and being selfish and being unable to change to be empathetic to people and find what you need. While Winged Victory is unable to connect with people and have empathy for them, for people who are different than her. She's the type of character that it's a villain's mentality. She would rather change the world than change herself. If people are different than her, she sees them as less than human. And I'm talking in extremes because, we don't have all day to talk about this. Little did I know that these, as I was growing up and as I was reading this, and I've read Astro City since 1995 when it came out, I've got the promotional poster that I took off the comic book shop's wall. It's the only time I ever told them I was taking something, not asking for it, framed. And I lived Astro City, and this character, every time she pops up, just blows my mind. Little did I know that these traits that I'm showing you would leak in to the basis of a lot of comic book characters that have been created since about 2015 that have replaced other heroes. Mr. A, never have I had a character so infuriate me. When I read this, even though this is simple stuff from the late 60s by the great Steve Ditko, that he comes up with, it was Steve Ditko with his philosophy in print. Then he read some books, came up with this ology, if you will. And basically, the whole thing is that card, black and white, no shades of gray, nothing in the middle. And I'm sitting here thinking, what a self-righteous bastard. Who is he to be the judge and determine what right and wrong is? And excuse me, but I've read enough to where, and experienced enough in life and seen enough in life that when people think in absolutes, that's dangerous. Okay. And a character dear to my heart, but I'm being objective for the topic and the theme today, Rorschach. Now, what's really great about comics when it comes to characters and being able to read their exploits and get into them is that we are voyeurs. We get to see inside their thoughts. We get to read their journals. We get to see them day to day. So if we didn't have that information and we saw these characters on face value, we saw them on the news, we just heard about these things, we would not know what was at the core of their characters and what they were going. Rorschach is about no compromise. Rorschach is about black and white, inspired by The Question of Mr. A, by the way. And there's no compromise, even in the face of Armageddon. That sounds like something that would be a great attribute to have. Until we get into the real world, which Watchmen was based, and it was the dynamics of heroes, of how they could exist and have led feet in the world, the real world. That's very dangerous. And he paid for it with his life. And a lot of these things where we were on this journey with Rorschach through the Watchmen, we're very sympathetic and cheer the character. Objectively, theologically, there's arguments to be made that it's not right. Okay, so, and ironically, in the real world, he could have come across as the real hero. So that goes to tell you. So that's what heroes aren't, and it really bothers me that over the last couple of years I've never been able to put my finger on. I did a video years ago talking about I'm not going to be doing Marvel comics, new Marvel comics on here anymore, buying them and reviewing them and things like that. And I finally put my finger on them because the heroes are, it got to the point heroes were not that much different than the villains, and the villains that define the heroes have been made a joke of. A lot of them. If you don't believe me, go watch Quantumania and look what they did to MODOK. You know what I'm saying? So we're just in an era. This is just an objective thing. Okay. So what makes the hero with DC? They started out with a lot of things. There's a lot of things that makes heroes. There's a lot of origins that makes heroes. You had the calling, where you become a hero. First thing that pops in my mind is Hal Jordan being pulled by the ring to Abin Sur, right? You have the trauma that makes you a hero, of like Batman and all the other characters that lost someone, Spider-Man and things like that, right? And then there's things where once you become a hero, things can refine you and make you a better hero. One of the tropes that's huge with DC is making opposite versions of the heroes. Now, this is an Alex Ross photo cover to his mythology. It was just the biggest thing I could find, but we had Black Adam, who's the opposite of Shazam with his costume. Sinestro, who is basically the opposite of Hal Jordan. Professor Zoom, which comes closest to being the actual doppelganger almost. I don't like calling him Reverse Flash. I think Professor Zoom is much better. They were the opposites. And this was a trope. This was a trope of like, I got to fight my mirror version of me and stuff, right? So they go on and on and on with these things over the years, but I never really saw somebody really slow down to see the self-reflection of a hero. To me, it's a thin line between being self-righteous and putting your morals and beliefs on other people than to come to be saving lives and stuff, right? But I think what makes these heroes and they keep from doing that is the fact that they've had to look at themselves. And I can't really think of a story where somebody has really done that. And I'm talking about seeing evil versions of yourself. With me, when I was 18, this is another thing that made me think about this over the years. When I was 18, I met my biological father, who was 38 at the time when I was 18. And what I saw was not how I envisioned myself turning out in life. So I was able to do a benchmark there and do a gut check and be like, I'm not going to be like this guy. And that's how I picture these heroes with that, with what they're doing and how they go. A lot of things happen. Now, DC by no means is the only one that's ever done this with like Earth 3, which is, you know, right there, right? I'm well aware that we've had Warlock have his other half actually become a person and start a space church with Magnus and Warlock. It went huge with Infinity War, where we had all these evil versions of the characters pop up. And these were actually some of these stories that came up when Marvel actually started doing this proper with this line. There's a new Warriors issue I tried to find for this video, and it's a fantastic cover. It's Speedball and I think Darkball or something. He was fighting the opposite of him, the evil version of him, and it was like the best Speedball story ever. You know, they made Speedball interesting in that one story, so there's a lot to be told there. Now, the reason I'm going a little bit DC centric here is that when you read Justice League versus Avengers by Kurt Busiek and George Perez years ago, there's a section of the story where the Marvel heroes are exploring the DC world, what the heroes have done. And then the Justice League was on the Avengers world, the Marvel world, and they were looking around and doing recon and seeing their world. And there was a moment there that I was like, Kurt Busiek is right. Kurt was right. He was sitting there looking at it from their perspectives, and what they came up with was absolutely right. The DC heroes were looking at the Marvel heroes saying, you haven't done enough. Your world's a mess. Meanwhile, the Avengers are doing a gut check and having some insecurities coming up because the DC world was nowhere near as bad shape as theirs. And they were like, we're not doing enough. How are they doing this? Quicksilver was losing his shit because there was a Flash museum. Look how they treat their speedsters. They know what they're doing. So there's a lot there that built these heroes, and that's why I feel like, you know, interpreting this stuff, reading all these books, even though I can't think of a time it's actually been acknowledged by any of the heroes, is because they had to do a gut check and see the flaws of themselves, their dark side, what they could be, the mirror version of them, right? You Star Trek fans will know what I'm talking about, you know. Oh, we got here. Wow, we got some people here. Morning, Tim, and early memories discovering Matt Murdock's conscience and that of the nun who lied when asked if he was Matt's mother. Beautiful page and words. I, too, enjoyed that Batman story. I was going to mention, I'm probably, if I don't do it in this video, I'll be doing it a part 2 where I consider Peter Parker, the Thing, and the Born Again story of Daredevil as making them the best heroes in Marvel. Even above Captain America, of all things. Go figure. Eric Breen is here. I show up and the first thing I hear, Howard saying he's a voyeur. Then I'll stick around for a bit. There you go. Whatever it takes. I've always had a problem with the Punisher being considered a hero. He's a serial killer that's driven by grief and vengeance. He's an anti-hero, my friend. Yes, you are absolutely. That might make you feel a little bit better. He's an anti-hero. He and Wolverine do not claim to be heroes. Maybe it goes back to Superman, caregiver of Earth, indebted to the surrogate parents who take care of him, didn't exploit him, loved him. That's what that is the perfect segue to the next chapter here, leading up to some of the things I'm going to be talking about. Now, when you actually look at the DC heroes, we're going back to the core, and you look at Marvel heroes, the biggest thing with DC heroes is really kind of hard, and we're talking objectively. I love all this stuff, right? But what do we have? We have a billionaire who lost his parents. Trauma, wealth does not dismiss trauma. We have a princess from an island. We have Superman, born with 2 parents, lived on the farm, had a great upbringing, morals and stuff like that. And that's the big trinity. The Hawks were space cops to begin with, actual cops from space, and Hal Jordan had a ring handed to him because he had a gift inside of him of willpower and being able to overcome fear. He was fearless back then, and things like that. Then you get the Marvel heroes, and man, Spider-Man was raised by his parents. They were poor, and he was picked on at school. Daredevil thought his mother was blind or was killed. And he lost his sight, was blind, even with his radar sense, lost the love of his life in a horrific way in his mind with Elektra. And then years later had to watch her die. And then a little bit later, he lost everything. Fantastic Four got hit with cosmic rays, and the Thing Grimm turns into the Thing. There's sacrifice and it's a monkey's paw. Marvel characters used to be sort of monkey paw. You got great power, but there was a catch either in your personal life or the tragedy or things that happened. So different set of heroes, but this is what I think kind of vindicates what's going on with the DC heroes. With what I just said with the origins, princesses, born of wealth, the true privilege of socioeconomic means and not having a lot of hardships in life and things like that with what they're showing. That's what made them better heroes, is that they faced what a lot of us can do in life, and sometimes we have to. Some people run from it, some people freak out, some people ignore it and go in denial, but they actually looked at themselves, the evil versions of themselves, by looking at the Earth 3 crime syndicate, the worst of the worst. They actually visited this, over the years. They ended up visiting Earth 3 and seeing what the world was like. And it had to make them do a gut check stuff. It's what I think keeps them grounded, builds up, makes them more focused on morality and not becoming self-righteous and trying to take over the world, a la Squadron Supreme, 1985 by Mark Grunwald, when it shows when the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So that's what makes them all. Now, a lot of heroes can kind of get there over the years. You know, you just don't see that version of yourself. It takes a little bit of work, or it's a wake-up call, or it's in your mind. A great example of this is the Incredible Hulk meeting the Maestro. Peter David did a great thing. That was the great thing of having creators stay on a book for years and stuff. They could build up things and recall things. I know many times I was reading the Hulk when Peter David was still on it, and he would like see the image of the Maestro in his head, the evil version of himself from the future, not an evil version of himself, actually him in the future taking over the world. He was trying to be very careful not to become that. So that's what makes the most interesting stories, is what's made them better heroes. The last couple of years, we have the Marvel Universe ended up becoming a bunch of Booster Golds and Winged Victory. Nobody earned their place. Ironheart did not earn her way into being part of the Iron Man verse. The Cho kid became Hulk. They just sort of Jane Foster Thor. These were the real problems with it, is that there was no story of how they really got there that was heroic or vindicated. It was a lot of entitlement. It was a lot of Winged Victory and a lot of Booster Gold. And very rarely do I talk about other YouTube channels, but there was a YouTuber I found. He's been around for a while and he was big. I think he's called Atop the Fourth Wall. And basically he's patterned himself with the formula of being an angry video game nerd, but for comics, whatever works for him, right? And he's been doing it for years. He writes his own material. He sells things, but I found him 2 years ago, and it blew my mind because he's been around for a while, but he showed up in my feed and he was doing a Pinhead versus martial law review. His channel motto was something like, "Where bad comics go to die." Remember, it's Angry Video Game Nerd. If you've ever seen that, he talks about bad video games. This guy talks about bad comics. And he threw in martial law. Now, if martial law is not your cup of tea, I got no problem with that. But in the middle of his video, he stopped everything to make it clear that he hated this character. I have done a video about why I hate Booster Gold, but I try not to misrepresent Booster Gold. I just tell you my viewpoint. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. Not that big a deal, really. But what bothered me is that after he trashed martial law and put him in, didn't like him, he didn't tell the full story of martial law. Martial law started out as a self-loathing guy who was San Francisco law enforcement, more or less, after a big disaster and their big war and everything like that. And he was more or less a cop. And they did a series of books where martial law would call out the hypocrisy of heroes. It's sort of like the bastard cousin of Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, in my opinion. To me, it's part of a trilogy of 80s books. It was that Epic, Apocalypse Comics, did a couple crossovers with Dark Horse and Image. There's an omnibus out. But he made his way up to where he did a thing with Savage Dragon. Now, throughout the course of it, it calls out the hypocrisy of comics, takes the piss out of them a little bit. Golden Age, Marvel Universe, Legion of Superheroes, they touched everything, right? In my opinion. And then they turned around, and you start realizing by the time maybe 10 years has gotten, maybe within a decade, by the time we do a crossover with the Savage Dragon, you start realizing that martial law is actually, he wraps barbed wire around himself and everything because he is a hero and he hates heroes. He always ends his story with this little trademark saying of heroes, I haven't met any. And then the saga ends where he starts making peace with things, himself and the world and the heroes around him. It's all cathartic. Everything is sort of symbolic of his psychosis, if you will, or whatever's going on inside his head, however you want to put it, to where at the end of this, he says, I've met a hero. I am one. He accepts that he is a hero after all the damage that's been done through the trauma of PTSD and war and everything like that. So it's quite possible for crap villains like Booster Gold and Winged Victory and stuff to actually have characterization and personal growth, probably if they looked in the mirror and took a really hard look at themselves instead of projecting things out on other people. It's got to be cathartic to be able to like take a fist and punch a guy because he's a bad guy. You know what I mean? And things like that. So I just feel like the potential for any hero is there to become a great hero if they turn that self-righteous mirror off of other people and looked in it themselves. And that's what I think is really great about a lot of the DC heroes. Even though I could not, like I said, I could not think of a story where they're looking at themselves. Superman had Bizarro; they had their opposites. You know what I mean? Like I said, but I think that's an underlying factor that I think would make a great story if somebody touched on it. So basically, that's really it. I could go on and on talking in circles, but maybe I'll do another one where it's a bit more Marvel centric and stuff, man. But I'm just really thinking sometimes, I do consider comic books an art form, uh, more of the 20th century than now. They really had a lot to say if you look at the history of comics and where a lot of these creators came from at the beginning, being poor kids and everything. And then a lot of things became sort of pulled from other literature. Roy Thomas was a big guy with doing that. And then you can tell there's these stories where they're semi-autobiographical, where they're pulling from their childhood or things that they've experienced or seen that they apply to the heroes and everything. Always striving to be better, always striving to do the right thing, always striving to save lives, and never really crossing that line, that line of interference, doing too much, projecting things on other people. But I also think that that would be a great story because it's sort of like I'm thinking of comic book covers like Tony Stark, the Demon in the Bottle cover, where he's drunk wearing the Iron Man armor with a bottle of whiskey and he's sitting there looking at his drunk self in the mirror and things, right? That could be the perfect thumbnail for this video. But I think there's something to be said to having heroes be better because they can admit they had to work on themselves or they admit they were wrong with something. Seems like there's a lot of books where heroes today aren't right. They're just convinced they are. Everybody be excellent to each other and have a great day.